Welcome to Recovery Reach by Recovery.com, where we talk about the business of recovery, because the more people you reach, the more people you can help. Today, we're talking about targeting, what it really means, why it matters, and how narrowing your focus can actually widen your impact. Steve Donai, founder of Growth Sherpa, joins us to break it down. Let's get into it. So I'm really excited to have Steve Donai on the pod today. We're going to be talking all things targeting, which is a concept near and dear to my heart, with lots of twists and curves and confusing bits. And also, if done well, a massive impact for the business and for the people that you are able to help. So Steve, glad to have you here. Targeting. Let's kind of get into it, but set some foundational definitions. What do we actually mean when we're talking about finding a target market?
Andrew, thanks for having me back. Love talking to you guys as always. Targeting is pretty simple. It's basically coming to market with a plan. It's saying that this is the type of patient or patient profile persona that we want to focus our energy trying to treat. It can be incredibly broad. I mean, honestly, to some degree, I think every treatment center has some form of targeting concept, right? They might say, hey, we're looking to treat co-occurring patients or patients that might have disordered eating or mental health or whatever their specific thing might be. And that's clearly different than someone who is a dentist treating patients with, cavities. So in a broad sense, we all kind of target, but then, for the sake of our conversation, I think what we're trying to do is see how important it is to narrow that targeting down and really a lot of the benefits that come from that.
Yeah. What happens when you keep it really broad and you say yes to everyone who knocks on the door?
Yeah, so I think that's, I wouldn't say a strategy, but I think that's a symptom. A lot of times, a lot of new operators who are new to opening up a treatment center, right? And it's not malicious or malintended. It is really just saying, hey, we want to help people who are struggling with substance use, alcohol disorder, and mental health disorders, and we want to help everyone, right? I think it's a symptom of altruism, which is fine. But you can have some challenges, right, when you don't partner up a treatment plan with the right patient profile. Some of those sometimes show up as increased AMA rates, right? If the milieu management isn't aligned because you're not developing a cohesive culture within the treatment center, there's not shared experiences, there's not shared outcomes. You can see it as like I said, as increased AMAs, shorter lengths of stays, or potentially worse outcomes down the road. So I think from the back of house, obviously, you will find that there's challenges there. From the front of house, what I think you can get caught up in is from the patient side of things, you tend to show up looking kind of like everybody else. 10, 15 years ago in addiction treatment, there was less competition, there was less treatment centers, there was a lot less visibility to the consumer, to the patient. You would Google rehab near me, treatment center near me, you'd talk to a loved one, you'd talk to a therapist or someone, and you'd get a referral to a program. Now, because there's so many different options, by having a plan where you take everybody and you have your go-to-market look like you take everybody in, what you're really not doing is connecting with that person on an emotional basis, and you start looking like everybody else in the market. And now really what they're unable to do is discern why you're a better fit for them than Acme Treatment Center, right down the road. So it creates a lot of different logistical problems on the front end for the patient's buying process. And I use that term loosely. I know it's a very emotional and a healthcare decision, but there is a process involved in it. And then, of course, on the back end, there's some clinical challenges as well.
Right. So one of the benefits of figuring out this targeting question is that when your front end is aimed at this person who you can serve best, they come to your website and they immediately say, oh, this is for me, right? That's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the exercises I've been doing with a lot of our partners recently is taking a look at two automotive websites. So we all kind of get cars. Even if you're not a car person, you get cars.
Yeah.
One of the websites we look at is Bentley Motors of America, and the other is Chevy. And I get a big kick out of this because you go to Bentley, at least the last time I went to Bentley, there's not even a car above the fold. It's a lifestyle video. I mean,
Hmm.
they show their cologne. It's people hanging out at really nice locations. Because you go to Bentley, you're looking for a lifestyle, right? You're not really too concerned with MPGs. You're not too concerned with the safety, crash safety rating. You're looking for your lifestyle. You go to Chevy, they compete in every market, right? From small cars to large SUVs to truck, everything they're competing. And so their website is very driven on the JD Powers. They actually have like a partnership with Costco on there. They
Hmm.
have all the features and benefits. And so by not they can't afford to target market because they're doing the whole market, right? They're trying to appeal to everybody on this mass consumption. But then on the Bentley side of things, it's the lifestyle. So I find that very interesting and very correlative to what we're trying to do in addiction treatment is we're trying to define who is the right fit for our product. If you are the Bentley buyer, does your website reflect that? Or if you're a large multi-state, multi-location platform that has many options for people across all socioeconomic, geographic, and clinical presentations, how do you then message that to it? So I think that's where that exercise comes into play, and it shows the differences of targeting and the values of making sure you have that targeting strategy.
Yeah.
Not sure if I answered that question, so we can edit
No, that
that
was
part
that
out.
was good. I mean, it's just resonating with somebody, especially in a field of sameness that people are now seeing as they go to every homepage of nearby treatment centers. How do you stick out? How do you stand out? And a lot of that is just resonating with the type of person that this visitor is. One thing before we kind of jump into the more how do you actually figure out who this is, let's just say it plainly. Targeting is not going to say that you won't help somebody who is desperate for it, right? That's not what we're saying. How would you help people feel a little bit more okay with this idea of focusing on a smaller part of the large amount of the population that could use help?
Absolutely. So I think first on that one, for programs I worked with, I always like to implement a no wrong call policy. So if someone calls my treatment center or treatment centers I'm working with, they called the right place. Even if it's not the right treatment center for them, by all means, that program is going to work to help refer that person to the right treatment center. And we actually do a lot of different things for programs to help them do that. So things like putting a patient matchmaker in the CRM. So once they're clearly defined with who that they actually are going to treat internally and who they're going to refer out, finding a way to automate the refer out process so it has the decision tree of best clinical fit, best physical fit, best geographical fit. And you can use your technology to outbound refer that person to the right place. So the no wrong call policy, I think, when implementing a ideal client profile for your treatment center, is a really good strategy to make sure that you are still altruistic and still are treating the patient as the human needing help and getting them to the place they need to. Because ultimately, that's why I think the vast majority of us got into this line of work. But I think the other part of it comes from operating from a place of abundance instead of fear. I think there's a lot of fear for treatment centers saying, hey, if I don't take this person in, I won't meet my census, I won't meet my revenue, and we won't keep our lights on. That fear is justified in a lot of instances. I get it, right? But we also have to remember that 90% of people who meet medical necessity for our treatment centers don't get help every single year. And so it's a very small sliver of people who need help. So if we're actually actively targeting people that we know that our program will do a great job treating, and we focus really hard on that spot right there, and we say we know exactly who trusted partners we're going to refer the other people to, we can feel comfortable knowing that we're going to be full with people who we treat well. We're taking care of the people who we don't treat well and referring them elsewhere. And that there are so many people that need help. We just have to take care of who we take care of the best. So I think that's the two things is making sure you always have a policy of how do you work with your trusted partners and operate from a place of abundance and not fear.
Yeah. I guess real quick, I'm just curious. Do you have any folks top of your mind that you think do targeting really well?
Yeah, I would say in a lot of instances, the veterans and first responder programs to specifically treat veterans and first responders, they tend to do this incredibly well. And I think they do it for several reasons, do it well for several reasons. One, they come at it from a place of passion, right? I don't think I've ever met anyone who's run a first responder or veterans program who wasn't a former first responder or veteran or have loved ones who are. So they really care deeply about that population. Two, their physical properties are usually really well matched to the patient profiles. So they have they have the campus that might lead itself to having more physical rehabilitation for people who are dealing with physical injuries from the line of work, for instance. So they match up their physical programming with the clinical medical programming incredibly well. And then, of course, when you look at branding, target marketing, outreach efforts, they know exactly who they're treating, the veterans and first responders, and then they act accordingly. So I think when you look at programs that do that in particular, maybe not one or two, I'm not going to say anyone like jumps out for the sake of this conversation, but that market, that space within our industry tends to do a really good job of aligning everything down the way.
Yeah. That's one of the huge impacts of figuring out who you best serve is it just answers a lot of questions. It makes the answer that much more obvious for how you should run your operation. What should the messaging be? What, like you said, what things should I have inside of the center? What are my amenities? It really aligns everybody and just, yeah, it helps make these decisions a lot easier instead of spiraling and choosing between, this or that. I love that. So let's dive into how you actually do this. How do you find the person who your treatment center can best serve?
So if you're starting from a place of this is a new program, we're opening up from scratch, start where you're passionate about. Start what matters the most to you. I mean, if you're opening a treatment center and this is something that you really truly care about, that's the best place because you probably have your lived experiences. You have a general understanding of the ideal client profile because it's either lived or understood at a deeper level. So starting there for the new programs is definitely starting from a place of your own internal passions, desires, motivations. For existing programs, I think you have a lot more data that you can leverage, or you should at least have it readily available and you can find it. And one thing that we're really harping on at Growth Sherpa is outcomes-based marketing practices now. So there's plenty of vendors and there's plenty of data out there that can show you particularly well by demographic who your program is more uniquely qualified to treat than others. And sometimes that information can come out and be surprising. So for instance, let's say you've always positioned yourself as a young adult male treatment provider. And you use these great tools and great vendors to say, hey, let's see who we treat best. And it turns out middle-aged females actually have better outcomes 60, 90, 180 days post-treatment. Well, then I think you have a decision tree to make, right? You can say, well, do we completely change our marketing and outreach efforts to say we're going to focus our energy on middle-aged females instead of the young adult males? And change our market identity, which is challenging for many, right? To say we've been known for this for a while, let's change our market identity. If you do change that, you might have to change your physical plant as well, right? So if you have a young adult male program, it might change dramatically to the middle-aged female program. Like the physical location will look a little different. Similarly, you might have the conversation of, well, we've always said we want to be a young adult male program. We're known to the market as young adult male program. We're clearly doing better from middle-aged females. Do we need extra training? Do we need to have our clinical medical team have additional training support? How do we support them to be better at our target demographic, target market that we've done better at? So I think in making that decision, you can use these outcomes to say, hey, are we aligned with what we said we were aligned with? If you've never said you're aligned with anything, you can then see who you are actually treating best and then put that energy back into the front end to say, okay, well, we're going to focus our marketing and outreach efforts directly to those who we do the best treatment with. And then in theory and hopefully in practice, by getting more people in that you do a better job of treating based on the outcomes, you treat more of them, you have longer lengths of stay, lower AMAs, which is a lot less headaches from a business side of things, but then you have better outcomes and now your patients that you're treating are doing better. And it's this wonderful cycle where you can continue to drive that, see how it goes, review it, and then drive it some more. So I think if you're starting from scratch, you start from your place of passion. If you've been around for a while, start with your place of data. See what you're actually doing really well at, and put more energy into that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Start with passion if you're just brand new to it because you don't have the data to really know which direction is working. And then once you do, you kind of have a decision to make. Learn more about what you thought you were good at, but you realize outcomes data is showing we're not succeeding here, or pivot and go into something that maybe is different or new or you didn't think so. And I'm really curious about that option of saying we were treating adolescent males and now we're going to be treating older women. how do you steer an organization toward a new target market? And I'm sure there's probably a massive book that could be written about change management, but any insight there?
I think you have to really start at the executive team and get everyone on board and say, this is our plan, and invest the time, energy, and mental capacity of making a long-term strategic plan, because you can't you can't just put half effort into it. I don't think you can just barely nudge your way into it. You really do need to be thoughtful and understand the pitfalls and opportunities and all the different variables that can come with it. Obviously, what I've focused on the majority of my career here is patient acquisition. So I look at it from the patient acquisition side. What does the website look like? How is that different? How does your email campaign, email marketing, your print materials, how does your outreach team message it? Your admissions team messaging it. Your admissions team will probably need retraining. Your outreach team will need retraining on language and client personas and persona training. So just from the front end alone, there is a quite a bit of just messaging and workflow and training to do, and reprinting and graphics and all that stuff has to be done on the front end. Internally, the physical facility itself might have to look a little different. You might have to restructure things based off of the new patient profile. And if you don't know where to start, you can always start by asking the patients, right? You can do questionnaires, you can do feedback, you can find out what they find valuable and what they don't find valuable, and move in that direction. So it legitimately could be a 6 or 12 month turn, depending on the size of the program, the age of the program, but it has to be very thoughtful, have a lot of intent, and then be measurable on the back end too. So you don't have to just do these things. You want to continue measuring on the back end, making sure that they are continuing improvements. I think that's one of the things from any change in a treatment center's campus or treatment profile or staff or messaging is it actually working, right? Or, we added equine therapy. Is it working? Is it providing better outcomes? So I think all that from the change management standpoint comes with very thoughtful planning from the executive team, then buy-in from key people on the staff, typically people who've been there longer, who have a lot of patient interaction, team interactions, and are well respected on the team as a leader, and then continuing moving through the organization in a very thoughtful way. I just would suggest don't rush through it. I think that's the short of it, is don't close on Friday as adolescent males, open up on Monday, like here we are, and everything's different. It's okay. You can take the time to roll it out, and by taking that time, you'll have less headaches. It might go slower, and a lot of us are impatient, but you'll have a lot less headaches and a lot less challenges that way.
Yeah. Kind of thinking back to the decision of kind of get better at what you thought you were doing or just completely change. Have you ever advised your clients at a key decision point like that? The question I'm curious about is, like, how would you make that decision? Should I double down on something that's not working, but I swear it could? Or do you switch up your DNA?
I've been in a situation like this before. My focus. So the situation was pretty simple. A program I was working with wanted to add more tracks to their offerings. Right. I think at the time in our industry, tracks were the more exciting new things for treatment centers to advertise that they're putting out there. But my team wanted better trauma treatment. Like that's all they asked for. They said, "Hey, we feel we're currently in the top 90% of all trauma treatment programs out there. We want to be top 95%. And we feel like that would make things better. If we added somatic experiencing, if we added these other things, we started really building more robust focus around trauma treatment. And so to answer your question, how would I really find out like how to engage that and make them move? I would listen to the team, and I would in particular listen to the team that talks to the community, right? It's very challenging to understand the community sentiment of your program from within the program. It's especially challenging to understand that if you're the one who founded and created that program. But the people who talk to the clients and the referral sources on a regular basis, they see and understand the unfiltered version of what people in the world think. So I talk to admissions, I talk to outreach, I talk to alumni teams. They do a great job of hearing from people who are in recovery from that program who are saying, this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like. And I would be very thoughtful on that process.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Earlier, you had mentioned you have a policy with your clients, the no wrong call policy. So I am curious now. You say we've made a decision. We're going to be focusing on this particular type of patient. Someone else calls. What should you do as someone who has decided I'm only really going to try to help this type of person and not some of these other folks?
Yeah, I think my experience in the industry, 11 years now listening to calls, what really has been a struggle for me is hearing programs who get that call for a patient who's not a fit, either geographically or clinically or financially, just referring to SAMHSA or referring to an 800 number locally. Occasionally that is the right solution, but I think that we have enough resources now, especially if an outreach team and you have people in the field making relationships for a living with intent. You have an opportunity to really build out a robust amount of partners in the space for other types of treatment, be it levels of care or different treatment modalities or whatnot. Utilizing a CRM and to really sit down and write down this information and structure it in a way where your admissions team can really quickly on the fly make an outbound referral with full confidence while that patient is on the phone is paramount, because we don't know, first of all, if that patient on the other end of the phone is ever going to pick up the phone again. And I'm always going to act as if they won't. So in my mind, we spent, from the business side of things, we spent money to make the phone ring. We've answered the phones, we have labor, we have systems, we have technology in place. We spent the energy talking to that person. Why then are we going to just cut it off right there when there's already a fairly decent investment on that first phone call, on that person? So from the business side of things, it makes no sense to me why we wouldn't take that person just one step further and get them directly warm transferred to another treatment center that they can work with immediately. To me, that seems like it's a very logical business case to use. From the human side of things, we know it takes a lot of courage to pick up that phone and say, I need help, and to tell your story. And for your first response could be within a matter of a couple minutes, no, I can't help you. That to me is a really big challenge for a lot of reasons, but mainly because that person, again, might not pick up the phone again. That might be our only shot to get that person into treatment and get help. So all that to be said, there's a very great case from the business and human side of why we want to take a little bit of extra time and energy to put into a system and a plan to outbound refer. That system and plan starts with typically community outreach, building out the CRM, and pretty much every CRM I work with can do this, on a full profile of your referral sources, what patient types they treat, what levels of care, what insurances they take, what are exclusionary factors, who's the best point of contact, how do they like to be contacted, all the things you need to put in there. It takes 10 seconds per account after you leave them, so it's really easy. And then rating the accounts as far as preference of outbound referrals, A, B, C, D, for instance. So that when admissions gets a call and they say, hey, where are you located? I'm located in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay, well, look at this. We have a partner we work with right down the street, and based off of who you are, I know they're a fit for you. And that extra little step is a warm transfer that goes a long way, obviously, with the referral source relationship. But I think on the bigger side of things, it goes a long way with that patient saying, hey, you know what, they actually listened to me and cared about me. That is their first entrance into the recovery process. It's not a no. It's I'm not the right person to help you, but I know for a fact this person is. I'm confident they can. And I think also that takes away a lot of the challenges admissions teams have. A very common complaint I get is it just takes too long to outbound refer, because now I have to send an email to outreach. They have to tell me who they like, or I have to text this person who works over here, and now it becomes a whole thing. And then by the time we call the patient back, they're no longer picking up the phone. And that's all very valid, but you can get ahead of that with just putting a system in place, trusting the system. And is that system going to be 100% perfect? No, but neither's the other way of doing things. But at least this system is thoughtful and scalable, and something you can replicate, versus over here where you're on the fly all the time trying to figure it out. So I think that would be my answer, is for the no wrong call policy, investing a little bit of time into the actual policy internally of how that process goes, training the team and moving forward. It actually builds just a ton of simplicity into what is really a really challenging situation.
Yeah, I love that. And let's go a little bit deeper into kind of the challenges. I mean, you persuaded me. Like, I think it does make a lot of logical sense here. It's super patient-centric. So what are the hurdles that are preventing this from happening everywhere? And how does one overcome them?
I think the biggest hurdle is just really leveraging your MarTech stack. So what do you have for your call system? What do you have for your CRM? What do you have for your EMR, right? So what does your front end technology stack look like? That's probably the most foundational part of revenue generation is knowing that front end process. I joke all the time. I think our industry is very interesting that by and large, most programs in addiction treatment, behavioral health don't know where the revenue comes from, and they don't know how efficacious their product is. And I don't think that would work in any other part of healthcare where you don't know how you're acquiring patients or how effective your product is. Is this dental procedure going to fix my teeth? Like, yeah, it is, right? Like, there's studies on it. We're not quite there yet. So I think from the front end, the biggest hurdle is just getting that tech stack up and running in the first place and making sure it's effective. The second problem is then actually ongoing coaching, right? How do you then make sure outreach always enters in the data that's important? How do you make sure admissions follows the second? It's that oversight part of it. And I think just for the sake of brevity, the biggest coaching I would have for that, especially for outreach, is really internally as leadership decide what information you truly need from an outreach person to put into their CRM and stick to that. So for me as a leader, there's very few things I really care about. I don't care about you logging text messages or phone calls or LinkedIn posts or any of that stuff. I want to know about meetings you've held that were known by both parties beforehand. And I want you to enter in certain amounts of demographic data about the treatment center for the patient matchmaker system. If you can do those two things as an outreach rep, I am usually peachy keen. I'm super happy with that information because we can do a ton with that. So I think that overcoming the first hurdle is having it. Overcoming the second hurdle is deciding what's important to you and having the oversight to keep that running.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's great. So let's get more into you've chosen this target market and some of the confounding factors that kind of make this tricky, including things like, so maybe you've chosen a patient, but they have a family. They have other people who may be making the call or trying to figure things out. So when you have kind of two overlapping targets, like how do you communicate something to both of these groups?
Yeah, that's something that I found interesting. So I think back about 10 years or so ago, I was working to get this gentleman into treatment, and his mother called me. His 88-year-old mother called me and was very interested in the treatment program and what they offered. Her biggest interest was, do they have equine therapy because he likes horses? And it was like a very passionate belief of hers, like he has to be on these horses. And when talking to him, he was like, I really don't care. Right? Like I want to go get sober. I want to be with my family. And so it was funny seeing like the different decision making, the buying processes, how each party came to feel comfortable on landing on that choice. And I think we see that a lot in treatment when it's the family that's been seeking challenges, and I want someone to get treatment. They need treatment. They don't need a spa. They need these things like bare bones. And the person who's seeking treatment is saying, I really do need a breather. So if there is yoga or mindfulness or meditation, I would really love that. Like that would help me, calm down and get through this process. And so if you have a website that is showing the meditation, mindfulness, the adventure therapy, all of the things that are enjoyable about early recovery, the family might see that and go, oh, I'm not sending that person there because this, to them, they feel like there should be a more seriousness, right? Or a punitive sort of core to their belief system. Versus if you had that on the website, you have the patient going, I'm not even gonna go there, right? I'm not even gonna check that out.
Yeah.
So I think it is a true balancing act. You can overcome this several ways. I would say from the first outbound appearance, it's very important for a treatment center to share their culture and their values with both parties through their website and through their social media. That can look several different ways, right? Blogging is a very common, low cost, easy way of putting your information out there. Talking about why you chose equine therapy as part of your treatment modality and what that means. So the person who might not care about it as much can read that blog and say, oh, I see how this is impactful, right? Oh, I can see how mindfulness is impactful, and the two parties who are part of that decision for someone to go to treatment, as there often are, they can share that information back and forth and have a dialogue and then feel more grounded and neutral on that topic that could have been originally very divisive. I think the second is, and this is huge, is really utilizing video content right?
Mm.
We're in an age where video content, by and large, is cheap, easy, and relatively quick to get to market. And you can share everything you need to share about your culture, your people, your process, your belief systems directly with your consumers. And for almost every treatment program I've ever worked with, I've done this now in 33 states. I've been able to talk to lots of great people all across the country. It's rare that I go to a program and I don't feel something special about that program, right? There's always something that really hits. That's probably why I love this work so much. Is there's always something that really hits from each treatment center. But the consumer won't know that unless you share that with them. So without doing the video content on social or particularly on the website, when you have these two parties who are at ends of what their process looks like, you're not giving them an opportunity to meet in the middle and say, okay, this is why it totally makes sense for us to use this. So I think that that's a great topic that when it comes to traditional marketing, it's not a logical part of the buying process for many other commodities or products out there. But for treatment, you have a very strong emotional, visceral, historical response to perhaps what could be two different beliefs on what treatment should be by parties that are involved and have these deep histories together. And I think by communicating to them on some common grounds through the written and through the video, you can help them meet in the middle a lot easier. And that's final thought on that is we all often talk about meeting the patients where they are. I think that's the first step is meeting them exactly where they are with how they communicate and how they digest information from your website and your content.
Yeah. You said that usually when you go to a center, you can tell right off the bat something is special or what that thing is. I feel like I hear from folks who like they just don't know what's special about their own center sometimes. So what's your spidey sense? How did you develop that? How could you help an owner be like, oh, this is unique relative to what else is going on?
That's a good question. We do some really cool thought activities with our clients as far as tying in their brand identities and helping them really dial in their brand identities. One I did a long time ago with a program, even pre-Growth Sherpa, was what retail program or what retail provider would you associate with, right? Are you Neiman Marcus? Are you Nordstrom? Are you Ross? TJ Maxx? What are you?
Mm-hmm.
And I had my gut, like I knew off the bat, like I felt right off the bat kind of where they were. But as we started talking through what makes each of those retailers special and unique, more than just price points, but floor layouts and communication styles and service levels, they land on Nordstrom. And I said, yeah, cool, that's exactly what I saw too, because in their instance, it was high levels of service, really nice facility, high quality, everything throughout. But it wasn't Neiman, right? It wasn't hyper exclusive. It wasn't TJ Maxx. It was at a certain niche for people. But once we knew that information, we could then model really all the communication and everything down to like what you gave away at conferences. Like everything was able to model off of this. So what I like to do when I see programs who are having a hard time finding that identity, take them out of their own headspace, and then we start looking at other things that everyone can recognize and understand easily. So for me, I'm a car guy. I do cars a lot. We do retail stores a lot. We can do restaurants a lot. You can find something that everyone has common grounds in, and then start having that dialogue over it. And I think that opens people up to the conversation of understanding, working through their own thought process of who they want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I love those thought exercises. Honestly, it's part of the reason why looking outside of your own company can be so helpful sometimes. Going with an external consultant or even just asking patients or people in the community what they think about your organization can be really it can change your mindset a lot. And you're like, oh, I had no idea that's why people were coming or what they thought about us. And that's a big thing with brand is you can think you know what you stand for, but really brand is something that lives in the minds of the people that you serve. So if you're not communicating with them and getting feedback from them, you might be way off. It's really interesting.
Branding is something that everyone tries to be hyper aggressive in protecting, but nobody truly ever owns, right? Like to your
Yeah.
point, it is truly owned in the ethos of others, not yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of started to talk about once you pick out this person, it can impact what you're doing on the front end of your business for patient acquisition and just communicating to these folks. I don't know if you have any lessons you've learned, but like say I'm now targeting a adolescent male. How do I go about communicating to that person specifically versus I'm just going to say I'm going to target these adolescent males, but here's some copy, and I don't know if it's really resonating.
Yeah, a great example of that, and can't give every trick up the sleeve. But
Yeah.
so unbeknownst to a lot of people, that the number one search engine for people 45 to 65 years old is Bing. I'm not quite 45, so I'm still a Googler. And I'm sure we're going to start seeing pretty soon ChatGPT is going to start weaving its way in there as search
Yeah.
engines as well, right? But so if you are communicating directly to that target market, why would you over heavily invest in Google AdWords or paid searches for Google when Bing might be the better communication tool, more affordable, more targeted? And so I think that's the decision to have is where are the people that you're serving or are they living, especially digitally? And then where are they living in the community? So I'm in the Southeast. I'm out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and clergy is a very large referral source throughout the Southeast to treatment, right? People have different relationships with the clergy in the Bible Belt than they do in other parts of the country. So if you're meeting someone where they're at, a lot of times having a relationship with the churches in a market is going to yield one type of demographic, right? Versus having relationships with the criminal justice system or the hospital system. And so I think that's where it really takes a way of looking at what vertical markets are my ideal client profile engaged with. How do they consume media? Do they consume shorts? Do they consume podcasts? Do they consume blogs? And that whole strategy on the front end is really geared around meeting them again where they're at. So that's, I think, just the really short answer of how do you re-strategize based off your target market is looking at all those factors. And then once you get those factors down, then you can really dig granularly into each specific component of how do you market differently to a hospital than you do criminal justice or clergy, for
Yeah.
instance.
I love that. I love that it starts with the person, with that audience. We might call that kind of audience research. And it's very important to know those two things. Where do these people live online and offline? Because you'll need to be in both or just wherever they are in order to really have an impact on them. So, just like hard examples, Steve, if we're going after adolescent males, what social media platforms are they on? I might be more familiar with Facebook. Is that where 13 to 17-year-olds are hanging out? Probably not.
Right. I don't think they're still on MySpace. I don't think that's cool anymore. Yeah, and that's the question you have to ask, and not just and again, we keep getting granular with it. Where are they hanging out? How do they communicate where they're hanging out? Right. I'm a elder millennial, so I'll have gifs in my texts nonstop. But then you go to a Gen Z, you might have more memes, and it
Mhm.
changes how the dialogue is. So I think it's very interesting, but to your point, it's about the patient, and ultimately, our industry has to get to value-based care. It's just a necessity for the future of our industry to be able to get to. The way you get to value-based care better is being more focused on who you do the best job with in treating and getting the better outcomes. Ultimately, that does a better job for the patient. So the one thing that I'm hopefully hammering home with all of our current and then future clients, and the thing is most passionate about, that I'm most passionate about right now, is really that outcomes based marketing strategy. Because I sincerely believe that by doing these things where you really focus your language, your communication style, your communication spaces, all towards a patient that is the right fit for your program, and then you treat them incredibly well, that's just going to lift our entire industry up. That's one of those rising tides lifts all ships sort of situations. So it's very exciting. It's fun stuff, and it's exciting seeing the pivots in treatment centers too as you start getting more and more of the patients that come in that are great fits for them get better outcomes, and the staff gets happier and the staff gets more pumped, and it's just it's really great for everyone organizationally. It's been a
Yeah.
fun journey, and I think it'll continue to be a fun journey for our space.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the back end of this. We talked a lot about the marketing and the communications and the reach outs, but yeah, let's talk more about once you choose who you best serve, kind of how the positive consequences of that. You mentioned with your clinical team, alumni, outcomes, and it kind of creates this feedback loop that people are leaving positive reviews. And now the folks who are investigating, who are looking at your center, are seeing those positive reviews, and it all kind of feeds back into itself. So what have you seen when folks are doing outcomes-based marketing really well? I guess, what does that look like? What are they able to do? And then how is that impacting the front end?
Once the decision's made that this is my target market, then you can start asking the questions, what do we need to be concerned about, and what is the benefit, right? So one of our programs that we worked with made the intent to say we're going to work more with the criminal justice system. And when you do that, of course, then there's concerns of what is that, preceding criminality? Is it violent? Is it nonviolent? What is the cause of that process? But assuming there's going to be a percentage that could be more challenging, do we need to have different steps in place with communication to parole officers, communication to DAs, with different sorts of living situations? So on the front end, once that decision is made, on the back end, you can start having all these discussions, this dialogue about what do we need to change, do differently, staff up differently. Similarly, with a program that I worked with in the past and did a lot with athletes, the gym is going to now be better. The nutrition is going to be different because we need to have more support for athletes, because these are going to be stressors for them if they don't have a good fitness facility and good food for their plan. Are they going to be more stressed, and are they going to be more worried and want to get out of there sooner? So the very first time you make that decision, you get to start going down this planning of what are all the little nuanced things we need to plan for. And you'll probably miss one or two. That's fine. You're going to miss stuff, but you do your best, and you start getting patients in, you get feedback, and you go from there. But then, to your point, the staff is going to be engaging with a more similar type of client at a higher level, right? So instead of having a few people who might be in the first instance from the criminal justice system, or a few athletes coming to the second instance, now they're getting to know the needs and the wants and the processes better ahead of time, right? Because you have more interaction, you have more experiences, you have more of those speed bumps that you've already seen for other patients, and you start getting ahead of those as a staff. And now AMAs can go down, and the length of stays go up, and all those positives come from it. So I think from a staffing standpoint, you just get more experience, and you get more visionary and proactive on the treatment for patients versus reactive, because everyone is a hyper unique case. So a long time ago, my background was in more market research and trend analysis, and you find it's really easy to predict the behaviors of populations, but very hard to predict behaviors of individuals, right? So if you have certain key check marks of any person, age, gender, voting ID, whatever it is, voting party affiliation, whatever, you can start making predictions, because as populations, people tend to do similar behaviors if they're in similar populations. But as individuals, people are wildly unique. So if you get the opportunity of expanding your milieu in a treatment center of more people with a lot of those similar population markers, what you're able to then do is have better predictive activities and be more proactive for their treatments and potential challenges, versus if you haven't identified a specific type. So by doing that, obviously you're going to hopefully focus your treatment on the better outcomes, but the service level you're providing, the hospitality you're providing to your patients is going to be improved, again, because it's not as reactionary, it's more proactive.
Yeah. Yeah. That made it crystal clear. Thanks. The only two other questions I had was, one is, how narrow should you define this? Because we were just talking about kind of population sizes, and the larger, the easier to predict. So what level of definition are we looking for with a segment?
I think that comes down to how you want to define your segment, right? So if we use the retail store example, Neiman Marcus says they're going to cater to the top 1% of the population, period. Like that's their population, right? So if you are going to be the Neiman Marcus of treatment centers, and you're going to be a higher cost per month, higher quality facility service, clinicians, etc., then that's who you're catering to. And your strategy has to be completely aligned with how do we message directly to that 1%. And in this case, we're talking socioeconomically, but you can obviously slice this up across any other sort of things based on clinical presentation or medical necessity or whatnot. But that's how I would define it. If I said I'm going to be the person who treats this very specific case because I have 12 beds and this is exactly what I can handle, that's exactly the way I would do it. But if I was in the TJ Maxx standpoint, say I'm going to be a big general population treatment provider, and my facility can take 200 people over these 10 buildings, and this is how we're going to do things. You can be a little more broad with it. I think there is argument to be made to probably be about 10% more specific than you would normally want given that example, and then being broader if you have to. But I would typically always start a little more specific than you have to, and then back it out.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a tough one because that is really, there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last one was just, is there a type of facility out there that shouldn't target, that shouldn't narrow at all?
I can't think of any. I think there's some companies that generally don't have to because they're so big and have so many programs that somewhere in their system they can do it for sure. There's some big folks that do that, but as an individual building provider, practitioner, no, I think that it behooves everyone to have that process to some degree and say, this is how I'm going to specialize and this is how I'm going to really focus my energy for treatment for my market. So yeah, absolutely. Everyone can benefit from it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Anything else that we didn't talk about that we should?
I think the only information I would probably leave people with is don't freak out if you're not doing it. Little steps are better than no steps. Making a little bit of headway every day is better than completely throwing it off. So I'd venture to say just about everyone could do a hair better or put a little effort into this if they haven't yet. And if you haven't done any of it yet, it's okay. You can start working towards that easily. So I don't want anyone to feel like this is some big harrowing task. You can take bite-sized chunks and get to where you want to be with it for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I think that's a wrap, Steve. This was great. I love this topic. That's today's episode. Thanks for listening to Recovery Reach. We'll see you next week. And remember, the more people you reach, the more you can help.